The Aleutian Mist, June 1942. In the frozen volcanic archipelago stretching like broken teeth from Alaska towards Siberia, a young man is about to make a decision that will cost Japan the Pacific War. He doesn't know it yet. Neither do the Americans desperately fighting for survival 5,000 miles to the south, where Japanese Zeros carve through their squadrons like vengeful spirits. This is a story about how war pivots on moments so small they seem accidental. A single bullet, a patch of grass concealing mud, two pilots who couldn't pull the trigger. The date is June 4, 1942. History will remember this as the day the Battle of Midway shattered Japanese naval power in the Central Pacific. 4 fleet carriers reduced to flaming wrecks, the pride of the Imperial Navy drowned in a single morning. But while that drama unfolds near a tiny atoll, another event transpires in the howling wilderness of the Aleutians, an event so quiet, so seemingly insignificant, that it would take months before anyone understood what had truly happened. Flight Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga will be dead within the hour. His aircraft, the most feared fighter in the Pacific theater, will sit intact in an Aleutian bog for 5 weeks before anyone discovers it. And when American intelligence finally retrieves what Koga left behind, the technological secrets locked inside that single airplane will help destroy over 5,000 Japanese aircraft and forge the most lethal carrier fighter ever to hunt enemy planes from Pacific skies. This is the untold story of the Akutan Zero, the ghost fighter that changed everything. To understand what Koga carried into the Aleutian Mist, you must first understand what the Zero meant to Japan. When the Mitsubishi A6M first entered service in 1940, it represented a quantum leap in carrier fighter design. Imperial Navy planners demanded the impossible, an aircraft with the range to escort bombers deep into Chinese airspace, the agility to dominate any opponent in turning combat, the firepower to destroy targets with short bursts, and the ability to operate from the pitching decks of aircraft carriers hundreds of miles from land. Jiro Horikoshi's design team at Mitsubishi achieved these contradictory requirements through ruthless weight reduction. Every component was examined, stripped to minimum tolerances, optimized for performance over protection. The resulting aircraft weighed barely 5,300 pounds empty, extraordinarily light for a fighter mounting 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns. That weight advantage translated directly into performance. The Zero could outclimb, outturn, and outrange every fighter the Allies possessed in 1941. But this performance came with a terrible price that wouldn't become apparent until much later. The Zero lacked armor protection. Its fuel tanks were not self-sealing. Its airframe was built to minimum structural limits with no damage margin. Horikoshi had created a sword, magnificently sharp, incredibly light, but brittle as glass. In the hands of Japan's superbly trained pre-war pilots, men who spent years mastering their craft, the Zero seemed invincible. Those pilots knew how to exploit its strengths while avoiding situations where its weaknesses mattered. The Zero announced itself to the world in December 7, 1941, when Zeros from 6 Japanese carriers swept over Pearl Harbor. They shredded American resistance, shooting down aircraft caught on the ground or struggling to gain altitude. In the months that followed, Zeros terrorized Allied pilots across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. They destroyed the American B-17 bombers attempting to defend the Philippines. They savaged the British Commonwealth forces defending Singapore and Malaya. They carved through Dutch defenders in the East Indies. Wherever Japan's carriers struck, the Zero established absolute aerial supremacy. American pilots who survived encounters with Zeros returned with reports that seemed exaggerated, almost fantastical. The Japanese fighter could turn inside anything the Americans flew. It could climb like a homesick angel. It appeared faster than seemed possible. Intelligence analysts struggled to reconcile these combat reports with their understanding of aircraft design. Some suspected the reports were exaggerated, products of combat stress and the natural tendency to mythologize a dangerous enemy. But the reports were accurate. The Zero was genuinely superior to every American fighter available in early 1942. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, backbone of Army Air Force's fighter strength, was outclassed in every category except diving speed. The Brewster F-2A Buffalo, equipping some Marine squadrons, was so inferior that pilots called it a flying coffin. Even the relatively new Grumman F-4 Wildcat, the Navy's frontline carrier fighter, struggled against the Zero's combination of speed, climb, and maneuverability. American pilots developed a healthy respect for the Zero that bordered on fear. Official tactical doctrine when jumped by Zeros was brutally simple: run away. Use diving speed to escape, because trying to dogfight a Zero was suicide. This wasn't cowardice, it was recognition of reality. American fighters simply couldn't compete in a Zero in turning combat at low speeds where dogfights developed. The psychological impact of this inferiority cannot be overstated. American naval aviators, men selected for their confidence and aggression, found themselves fleeing from enemy fighters. It was humiliating and demoralizing. Into this desperate situation flies Tadayoshi Koga, age 19, a product of Japan's rigorous naval aviation training system. He has logged hundreds of hours in the Zero, mastered its characteristics, learned its capabilities and limitations. On the morning of June 4, 1942, he launches from the light carrier Ryujo as part of a diversionary strike against American installations at Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands. The plan is straightforward: draw American attention northward while the main Japanese fleet engages at Midway. Koga and his wingmen are experienced pilots executing a routine mission. Everything proceeds exactly as planned.
Until a single bullet changes history. The round comes from a .50 caliber heavy machine gun somewhere in the Dutch harbor defenses. One bullet among thousands fired into the sky that morning. It strikes Koga's Zero at precisely the wrong point, severing the oil return line feeding his Nakajima Sakai radial engine. In an aircraft engine dependent on continuous pressurized lubrication, this damage is catastrophic. Oil begins hemorrhaging from the severed line. Engine temperature gauges climb. Koga has perhaps 15 minutes of engine life remaining, possibly less if he demands full power. He radios his section leader, reporting the damage. The response follows standard procedure. Proceed to Akutan Island, approximately 25 miles east, where Japanese planners have designated an emergency recovery site. A submarine waits offshore to rescue downed pilots. It seems like a reasonable contingency, a routine emergency procedure. Koga turns eastward, nursing his failing engine while his two wingmen, Chief Petty Officer Makoto Endo and Petty Officer Tsuguo Shikata, take up escort positions. The Aleutian Islands are among the most hostile environments on Earth. The chain stretches 1,200 miles from the Alaska Peninsula toward Kamchatka, a realm of active volcanoes, earthquake-shattered coastlines, and weather so violent that sailors call it the birthplace of storms. Fog banks hundreds of miles across materialize without warning. Winds exceeding 100 miles per hour can appear within hours. The islands receive perhaps 6 clear days per month. Navigation here requires equal parts skill, experience, and luck. As Akutan Island materializes through the perpetual mist, Koga spots what appears to be salvation, a long, flat expanse of grassland roughly half a mile inland from Broad Bight. The vegetation looks uniform and solid, stretching several hundred yards in length. It seems like a natural airstrip, perfect for a wheels-down emergency landing. His wingmen circle overhead as Koga extends his landing gear and sets up his final approach. The Zero slows to landing speed, Koga managing his failing engine to maintain control. From his vantage point 300 feet above, Shikata suddenly notices something wrong. On his second pass overhead, sunlight, rare in the Aleutians, glints off standing water between the grass stalks. The terrible truth floods through him. The field below is actually a bog. Thick mud and standing water hide beneath a deceptive carpet of vegetation. He tries desperately to radio a warning, transmitting frantically, but Koga is already committed. Too low, too slow, too late. The Zero's main wheels punch through the grass layer at 80 miles per hour and sink deep into the bog beneath. For one heartbeat, the landing seems successful, the main gear rolling on something solid. Then the wheels catch in the mud with tremendous force. The rest of the aircraft continues forward at landing speed. Physics takes over with brutal efficiency. The lightweight fighter, built to minimum weight tolerances through ruthless engineering, cartwheels violently. The tail whips forward and over. The entire aircraft flips completely inverted in a single violent rotation. The Zero slams upside down into the bog with crushing impact. Tadayoshi Koga dies instantly. The violent deceleration snaps his neck before his brain can process what happened. His body hangs suspended by the seat harness in the inverted cockpit, his service pistol and samurai sword still strapped to his waist, his flight suit pristine except for medical tape wrapped around his torso, remnants of previous injuries or precautionary measures against high-G maneuvers. He is 19 years old. He will never know that his death and the decision his wingmen are about to make will help destroy his nation's aerial supremacy. Circling overhead, Endo and Shikata face a decision that will haunt them for the rest of their lives, assuming they survive the war. Imperial Navy regulations are explicit and uncompromising. Any disabled Zero must be destroyed to prevent capture. The A6M represents Japan's most closely guarded technological secret. The Navy's tactical advantage throughout the Pacific depends on the Zero's mysterious superiority. Enemy intelligence must not be allowed to examine an intact example. Pilots are ordered to ensure no Zero falls into enemy hands, even at the cost of their own lives. The two pilots circle the crash site repeatedly, their machine guns armed and ready. From their altitude, they can see the Zero sitting upside down in the marsh like an overturned turtle. The aircraft appears remarkably intact, no fire, no obvious structural failure, just an inverted fighter resting in the bog. They cannot see inside the cockpit from their altitude. They cannot see whether Koga survived the impact, whether he is trapped, injured but alive, waiting for rescue. How can they fire on their friend when he might be clinging to life? How can they murder a comrade on the possibility that he might be dead? They circle again, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that Koga needs help rather than destruction. The Zero sits motionless in the bog. No movement, no signal, nothing. Their fuel gauges drop toward critical levels. They have perhaps 10 minutes of fuel time remaining before they must turn back to their carrier or risk ditching in the frigid Pacific themselves. The decision point approaches with terrible finality. Fire on their comrade's aircraft, ensuring it cannot fall into enemy hands but possibly killing him if he survived? Or preserve the aircraft in hope of rescue, violating explicit orders but honoring the bonds of brotherhood forged in combat? They cannot bring themselves to fire. The choice, made from compassion, from hope, from the simple human inability to kill a friend who might still live, will cost Japan dearly. After several more anguished passes, Endo and Shikata reluctantly turn westward and return to Ryujo. They report the crash location and their decision not to destroy the aircraft. Their commanders are displeased, but understand the impossible position the pilots faced. A submarine searches the waters around Akutan for hours before the American destroyer Williamson drives it away. Koga's body and his Zero remain alone in the Aleutian wilderness, 5,000 miles from Japan, waiting to betray every secret of the Empire's most feared weapon. For 35 days, Koga's Zero sits undisturbed. The crash site lies beyond normal shipping lanes and aerial patrol routes, hidden in a small valley that receives perhaps 6 days of clear visibility per month. The Japanese carrier forces that might have searched for the aircraft have already retreated westward after the catastrophic defeat at Midway. On that same June 4th morning, while Koga was making his final approach, American dive bombers caught the Japanese striking force at its most vulnerable moment, aircraft refueling and rearming on the hangar decks. Within minutes, bombs transformed Akagi, Kaga, Suryu, and Hiryu into floating funeral pyres. The Japanese four most powerful fleet carriers, veterans of Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean raids, and countless victories, gone in a single morning. With them died the flower of Japanese naval aviation. The most experienced pilots, the men who had trained the current generation, perished in those burning carriers. The carefully hoarded aircraft, the maintenance crews, the institutional knowledge accumulated through years of combat operations, all lost. Japan would rebuild its carrier air groups, but it would never again achieve the quality that characterized those pre-Midway formations. The war had turned decisively against Japan, though Japanese commanders did not yet grasp the magnitude of their defeat. In this context, a single crashed Zero on a remote Aleutian island seems insignificant. One pilot dead among thousands lost at Midway and across the Pacific. The war continues. The Zero remains the Pacific's dominant fighter. American pilots still flee when Zeros appear. But in that Aleutian bog, in that single intact aircraft, lies intelligence that will help reverse Japan's aerial supremacy. The Zero sits undiscovered through June, through early July, while the war grinds forward. American forces prepared to invade Guadalcanal, launching the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific. Japanese forces consolidate their defensive perimeter, preparing for the counterattack they believe will restore momentum. Neither side knows that the Pacific Air War is about to fundamentally change, that the mystique surrounding the Zero is about to be shattered by hard intelligence from an aircraft waiting in the Aleutian fog.
July 10, 1942. An American PBY Catalina patrol bomber, piloted by Lieutenant William Thies, becomes lost. Navigation in the Aleutians is treacherous in the best conditions. Magnetic compasses spin erratically near the Arctic Circle. Landmarks vanish behind fog banks, and weather changes from clear to zero visibility within minutes. Thies has been navigating by dead reckoning through heavy fog when he spots the Shumagan Islands through a break in the clouds. Recognizing his position, he corrects course toward Dutch Harbor, choosing to fly directly over Akutan Island rather than around it to conserve fuel. Machinist mate Albert Knack, serving as plane captain, happens to glance down at precisely the right moment. Through a temporary gap in the perpetual fog, he spots something that shouldn't exist in the Aleutian landscape, an aircraft shape in the marsh below. The bright red circles on the wings are unmistakable even from altitude. Those crimson discs, the Hinomaru roundels that mark Imperial Japanese aircraft, stand out against the green-brown bog like blood on snow. Thies immediately circles the site, carefully noting the position on his charts. The Zero appears remarkably intact, sitting inverted in the bog. This is intelligence beyond any conceivable price. A complete, nearly undamaged example of Japan's primary carrier fighter, available for detailed examination. Thies returns directly to Dutch Harbor and reports the discovery. Within hours, Navy intelligence officers are organizing a recovery expedition. The recovery team reaches the crash site and finds conditions almost too good to be believed. The Zero has landed in perhaps the only spot on Akutan Island where the bog provides perfect preservation conditions. The marsh is soft enough to cushion the violent impact, dissipating forces that would have shattered the airframe on solid ground, but firm enough to prevent the aircraft from sinking into oblivion. Aside from a crushed windscreen, bent propeller blades, broken landing gear, and damaged wingtips, the fighter is fundamentally intact. The fuselage remains sound. The engine mounts are unbroken. The wings are undamaged. Control surfaces are intact. They carefully remove Koga's body from the cockpit. His neck is clearly broken. Death came instantly. They note the extensive medical taping around his torso, remove his personal effects as intelligence materials, and bury him with military honors on a hillside overlooking the crash site. Enemy or not, he died serving his nation with courage. Then begins the challenging task of extracting a fighter aircraft from an Aleutian bog. The recovery operation consumes nearly 3 weeks of labor that tests human endurance to its limits. Workers construct a makeshift road using logs and planking, creating a stable surface across treacherous ground where men can sink to their waists in seconds. The Zero must be winched across this improvised causeway, moving perhaps 100 yards per day through terrain that seems determined to reclaim what has fallen into it. Temperatures hover just above freezing. Rain falls almost continuously, not the clean rain of temperate climates, but a penetrating drizzle that soaks through any clothing and seems to chill bone deep within minutes. Equipment freezes overnight despite being stored in tents. Metal tools rust within hours of exposure.
Men work in shifts, unable to remain outside for more than brief periods before hypothermia becomes dangerous. The Aleutians are proving as hostile to the recovery team as they were to Koga. Yet the prize justifies any hardship. This is not simply a crashed airplane. This is the key to aerial supremacy in the Pacific. Every day of delay is another day American pilots face an enemy they don't fully understand. Another day the Zero maintains its mystique of invincibility. Another day American boys die because they lack the intelligence to fight effectively. The work proceeds with agonizing slowness but absolute determination. Inch by inch, foot by foot, the Zero moves across the bog toward Broad Bight where a barge waits. The aircraft is handled with extraordinary care. This is priceless intelligence that must not be damaged further. Every component is precious, every intact system a source of potential insights. The Zero reaches Broad Bight intact and is loaded onto the barge. A cargo ship collects the precious cargo and departs the Aleutians, sailing south through waters that witnessed fierce naval combat just weeks earlier. The vessel carrying history's most important captured aircraft arrives in Seattle on August 1st. The Zero immediately transfers to another barge for the journey to Naval Air Station North Island near San Diego. Under heavy guard that never relaxes, the captured fighter reaches its destination in mid-August and moves into a secure hangar with 24-hour military police protection. Word spreads through Navy aviation circles with electric excitement, tempered by strict security. Only those with explicit need to know are informed. The Zero's existence remains classified at the highest levels. The restoration team begins work immediately, driven by urgency and the recognition that every day the Zero remains grounded is another day American pilots lack crucial intelligence. The work proceeds around the clock in shifts, with engineers carefully documenting every detail of the aircraft's construction while simultaneously repairing crash damage. What they discovered during this process provides the first concrete intelligence on Japanese design philosophy, and the revelations are astonishing. The Zero is built like a precision watch, every component optimized for minimum weight and maximum efficiency. Flush rivets cover the entire airframe, reducing drag to absolute minimum. The guns mount flush with wing surfaces. Internal structure uses the minimum material necessary for anticipated loads. No safety margins, no redundancy, just enough strength for the job at hand. Every system prioritizes weight reduction above all other considerations. Inspection panels open by simply pushing on marked spots, releasing internal latches without requiring tools. The entire aircraft can be disassembled and reassembled with minimal equipment, a crucial advantage for field maintenance on primitive island bases. The instrument panel displays remarkable simplicity. No superfluous gauges or controls clutter the cockpit, just essential instruments arranged for instant readability. Every dial serves a specific purpose. Nothing is wasted. The engineering philosophy becomes clear through examination. Accept any trade-off that reduces weight, because weight is the enemy of performance. The wings fold manually for carrier storage, requiring no complex hydraulic systems that add pounds and maintenance headaches. Control surfaces use fabric covering over metal frames to minimize weight. The construction is brilliant in its ruthlessness, its willingness to sacrifice anything, including pilot safety, for performance advantage. Engineers discovered that the Zero weighs between 5,300 pounds and 6,100 pounds fully loaded, depending on ammunition, fuel load, and configuration. This weight differential is enormous and explains much about the Zero's performance advantage. With 2,000 fewer pounds to accelerate, climb, and maneuver, the Zero enjoys inherent advantages that no American fighter of equivalent power can match. The weight savings come from sources that shock American engineers. The Zero lacks armor protection for the pilot entirely. Not thin armor, not inadequate armor, but no armor whatsoever. The pilot sits unprotected, his survival dependent on not being hit. The fuel tanks are not self-sealing. American fighters use rubber fuel cells with multiple layers that automatically seal bullet holes, preventing catastrophic fuel loss and fires. The Zero's fuel tanks are simple aluminum vessels. A single bullet can drain them rapidly or ignite their contents. The airframe structure is built to minimum tolerances with no damage margin. Wright Field materials analysts examine captured aluminum components and find alloys of excellent quality. Japanese metallurgy is world-class, but used in thicknesses American designers would consider grossly inadequate. Structural members that American engineers would build from quarter-inch aluminum, the Japanese build from material barely thicker than heavy foil. It works, barely, under normal conditions, but damage that would merely degrade an American fighter often proves catastrophic to the Zero.
This reveals a fundamentally different design philosophy between Japanese and American aviation. American fighters prioritize pilot protection and structural ruggedness, accepting weight penalties for survivability. The philosophy stems from American industrial capacity. The United States can produce more aircraft, so keeping pilots alive to fly replacement aircraft makes strategic sense. Lose the aircraft, save the pilot, put him in a new plane tomorrow. The Zero sacrifices protection for performance, designed to win through superior agility rather than absorbing punishment. This philosophy works brilliantly when Japanese pilots have superior training and experience, allowing them to exploit the Zero's advantages while avoiding situations where its weaknesses matter. It becomes a death trap when those advantages erode, when pilot quality declines, when the enemy learns how to force combat into regimes where the Zero's fragility becomes fatal. The armament package surprises American analysts. Two 7.7mm machine guns fire through the propeller arc, synchronized to avoid hitting the rotating blades. Two 20mm cannons mount in the wings, outboard of the propeller disc. This is formidable firepower for such a lightweight aircraft, heavier than the Wildcat's battery of 4.50 caliber machine guns. However, the 20mm cannons carry only 60 rounds per gun, limiting sustained combat capability. A Zero pilot must make every shell count. The engine is a Nakajima Sakai 14-cylinder radial, producing approximately 950 horsepower, significantly less power than the Wildcat's 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1830. Yet the Zero achieves superior performance despite lower power, testament to the weight reduction and drag minimization throughout the design. Horsepower-to-weight ratio, the critical metric for climb and acceleration, favors the Zero dramatically despite its power disadvantage. By September 20th, just 41 days after arriving in San Diego, the Zero is ready to fly. The restoration team has replaced the crushed windscreen, straightened the vertical stabilizer and rudder, repaired wingtips and flaps, and completely rebuilt the landing gear sheared off in the crash. The original three-blade Sumitomo propeller is carefully dressed and reused. The captured aircraft is repainted, with American blue circle and white star insignia covering the red Japanese Hinamaru roundels. It looks surreal, an American aircraft wearing Japanese clothes, or perhaps a Japanese aircraft in unconvincing disguise. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders has spent the previous week studying every aspect of the Zero while mechanics completed restoration. He sits in the cockpit for hours, familiarizing himself with Japanese instruments labeled in characters he cannot read, memorizing control positions through repetition, preparing mentally for a flight unlike any he has ever attempted. Sanders is an experienced test pilot with hundreds of hours in dozens of aircraft types, comfortable in unfamiliar machines, confident in his ability to adapt to new characteristics. But he is about to fly an enemy fighter whose flight characteristics can only be guessed from intelligence reports and combat observations, reports that might be accurate or exaggerated or simply wrong. If the reports are accurate, the Zero is faster than American fighters, climbs like nothing currently flying, and turns tighter than physics should allow. If the reports are wrong, or if the captured aircraft has hidden damage that will manifest only in flight, Sanders might not survive his first takeoff. He knows this. Every test pilot accepts risk as part of the profession, but there's conventional risk, testing a new design that might have unexpected characteristics, and then there's flying a completely unknown enemy aircraft based on second-hand combat observations from pilots who were fighting for their lives when they made those observations. On the morning of September 20th, 1942, Sanders climbs into the Zero's cockpit for the first time as pilot rather than student. Ground crews start the engine, which catches immediately with a smooth radial burble that speaks of quality engineering. The restoration team's work is vindicated. The engine runs perfectly despite weeks submerged in an Aleutian bog.
Sanders taxis to the runway, conscious that dozens of engineers, intelligence officers, and Navy brass watch from the tower and flight line. Everyone understands the stakes. This flight will either confirm or refute months of intelligence estimates. It will either reveal exploitable weaknesses or confirm that the Zero is genuinely superior to anything America can field. Sanders advances the throttle. The Zero accelerates down the runway with surprising eagerness, the lightweight fighter demonstrating impressive power-to-weight ratio. The main gear lifts off after a remarkably short ground roll. The Zero climbs aggressively, ascending at a rate that would be impressive in any American aircraft. Sanders immediately understands why American pilots report that Zeros seem to climb like homesick angels. The combination of low weight and adequate power produces climb performance that American fighters simply cannot match without significantly more engine power. For the next hour, Sanders explores the Zero's flight envelope with systematic precision. He climbs to altitude, tests stall characteristics, practices basic maneuvers, and carefully feels out the aircraft's handling qualities. Every movement is deliberate, cautious, building a mental model of how this machine responds to control inputs. What he discovers in that first flight will change everything about how America fights the air war in the Pacific. At low speeds, the Zero handles beautifully, light, responsive, incredibly maneuverable. Sanders whips the fighter through turns that would be impossible in a Wildcat. The aircraft feels almost alive, responding instantly to control inputs. He can see why Japanese pilots love this machine, why they describe it with almost spiritual reverence. In the low-speed turning fights that characterized early war combat, the Zero is genuinely superior to anything America has fielded. No exaggeration, no mythology, simple engineering reality. But as speed increases above 200 knots, roughly 230 miles per hour, something dramatic happens. The ailerons become progressively heavier and less responsive. At 250 knots, rolling the aircraft requires significant force on the control stick. At higher speeds, the ailerons effectively lock up, requiring enormous effort to produce even sluggish roll rates. Sanders immediately recognizes what's happening. The fabric-covered ailerons are ballooning with air pressure at high speeds, creating forces that overwhelm the pilot's ability to move the controls. American fighters with their metal-covered control surfaces and hydraulic boost systems maintain full control authority regardless of speed. A Wildcat pilot can roll his aircraft just as effectively at 300 knots as at 150 knots, but the Zero pilot loses roll control progressively as speed increases. At the speeds where modern combat develops, aircraft diving from altitude, building velocity, making high-speed passes, the Zero becomes increasingly helpless. The tactical implications crash through Sanders' mind with clear crystal. American pilots being outmaneuvered at low speed now have their answer. Accelerate. Push the fight into high-speed regimes where the Zero cannot follow. Use diving attacks from altitude where speed builds naturally. When a Zero pursues, enter a high-speed dive where the Japanese pilots simply cannot maneuver effectively. Then, and this is critical, execute a hard roll at speed to defeat any tracking solution the Zero pilot might have established. Sanders tests this repeatedly, pushing the Zero to high speeds, then attempting aggressive rolls. The aircraft responds sluggishly, almost reluctantly. He imagines being in combat, trying to track a target through a high-speed rolling maneuver, and realizes it would be nearly impossible. The Zero is designed for and optimized for low-speed turning combat. Force the fight outside that regime, and the Zero loses its primary advantage. Then, Sanders discovers something even more critical. During negative G maneuvers, pushing the stick forward sharply to induce negative gravitational forces, the Zero's engine coughs and dies. The sudden silence is shocking. Sanders is expecting engine hiccups perhaps, but not complete engine failure. The float-type carburetor, designed for positive or zero-G conditions, cannot maintain fuel flow during sustained negative acceleration. The fuel literally floats away from the carburetor inlet under negative G, starving the engine. The engine restarts when positive acceleration resumes. Gravity pulls fuel back into the carburetor, but for several crucial seconds, the Zero becomes a powerless glider. Sanders immediately recognizes this vulnerability it creates. An American pilot pursued by a Zero can enter a steep dive using negative acceleration, not simply reducing power and nosing over, but actively pushing forward on the stick to create negative G-forces. This maneuver kills the Zero for several seconds, while the American fighter, with its pressure carburetor that works regardless of acceleration, continues accelerating away. When the Zero pilot must level out to restart his engine, the American has gained separation distance and can either extend away to safety or reverse back into an advantageous attack position. This single weakness, this engineering compromise made to save weight, gives American pilots a specific, repeatable escape maneuver that will save hundreds of lives. Sanders notes another asymmetry. The Zero rolls much easier to the left than to the right. This is common in radial engine aircraft due to propeller torque effects, but the difference is more pronounced in the Zero than in American fighters. Combined with the high-speed aileron problems, this suggests a specific defensive tactic. When a Zero attacks from behind, an American pilot should enter a high-speed dive, then execute a hard right roll, the direction the Zero finds most difficult.
Over 25 days, Sanders completes 24 test flights, each revealing additional details. He tests the aircraft at various altitudes, power settings, and combat configurations. He performs mock dogfights against American fighters, with other test pilots flying F4F Wildcats and newer aircraft types. The data accumulated from these flights is extraordinary and immediately actionable, intelligence that can be translated into specific tactical recommendations that will save American lives. The Zero's maximum speed proves slightly less than the F4F Wildcat, contradicting combat reports suggesting the Japanese fighter is faster. Sanders speculates this might result from reconstruction weight or imperfect engine tuning. However, the Zero's range exceeds any American carrier fighter by enormous margins, over 1,900 statute miles compared to the Wildcat's roughly 900 miles. The Zero can remain airborne for over 6 hours, enabling operations that American fighters cannot match. Rate of climb exceeds American fighters significantly. The Zero reaches 20,000 feet in the time required for a Wildcat to reach 15,000 feet. In turning combat at low speeds, the Zero completes a full circle in the time American fighters complete only 3/4 of a turn. These performance characteristics explain why early war combat favored Japanese pilots so decisively. At low speeds and in turning fights, the Zero is genuinely superior to anything America fielded in late 1941 and early 1942. But Sanders' tests reveal that these advantages come with exploitable weaknesses beyond the high-speed aileron problems and engine cutout under negative G. The Zero's light construction means it cannot withstand battle damage. Hits that would merely degrade an American fighter, damage that would require repairs but wouldn't prevent the aircraft from returning to base, often prove catastrophic to the Zero. Without armor or self-sealing fuel tanks, a single bullet in the wrong place can kill the pilot or ignite the fuel system. The Zero is magnificent as long as it remains undamaged, but it's as fragile as porcelain once hit. Sanders' final report synthesizes all test data into actionable intelligence that is immediately distributed throughout the Pacific Fleet with unprecedented urgency. Every carrier air group receives detailed briefings. Training commands incorporate the findings into their curriculum within weeks. The recommendations are clear, specific, and based on hard test data rather than combat anecdotes. Avoid slow-speed turning fights where the Zero's maneuverability dominates. American fighters cannot win in that regime. The Zero is genuinely superior. Instead, use diving attacks utilizing the high-speed characteristics, where American fighters maintain control authority and the Zero does not. Build speed before engaging. Attack in a single high-speed pass, then extend away before the Zero can respond effectively. When pursued by a Zero, enter a steep dive using negative acceleration to kill the Zero's engine. This gives several seconds where the Japanese pilot loses power while the American continues accelerating. Execute a hard right roll at high speed where the Zero's locked-up ailerons cannot follow. This combination, negative G dive, high-speed right roll, becomes the standard escape maneuver taught to every American naval aviator. Use superior armor and firepower to absorb hits while delivering devastating bursts that will destroy the fragile Zero. American fighters are built tough. They can take punishment. Don't fear being hit. Fear not hitting the enemy. The Zero will burn or break apart from damage that American aircraft routinely survive. Employ team tactics and mutual support rather than individual dogfighting. Wingmen should remain together, covering each other. The thatch weave, already developed, becomes standard doctrine. Any Zero attempting to follow one American fighter immediately faces head-on fire from his wingman. This neutralizes the Zero's turning advantage by forcing the Japanese pilot into defensive maneuvering. Never underestimate the Zero's strengths, but never forget its weaknesses. It is not invincible. It is an aircraft with specific performance envelopes where it excels and specific regimes where it is vulnerable. Force combat into those vulnerable regimes, and American fighters can win consistently. The psychological impact of this intelligence proves as important as the tactical recommendations. For 8 months, American naval aviators faced an aircraft that seemed invincible, faster, more maneuverable, longer ranged than anything they flew. Pilots developed fear that eroded combat effectiveness. Men who survived early encounters with Zeros returned shaken, describing an enemy aircraft that could turn inside anything, climb impossibly fast, and operate at ranges that defied belief. Official tactical doctrine essentially conceded Japanese air superiority. When jumped by Zeros, American fighters were instructed to run away. Don't fight, flee. Use diving speed to escape, because trying to dogfight a Zero was suicide. This wasn't cowardice, it was recognition that American fighters simply couldn't compete in turning combat at low speeds. Now, for the first time, American pilots have concrete knowledge of how to fight the Zero and win. The mystique begins to crumble. Yes, the Zero is formidable in specific regimes. Yes, it possesses genuine performance advantages. But it also has weaknesses, exploitable, repeatable weaknesses that American pilots can leverage consistently. The Zero is no longer an invincible superfighter piloted by unbeatable warriors. It's an aircraft with strengths and weaknesses like any other, and American pilots now know exactly what those weaknesses are. The transformation in pilot confidence happens almost immediately. Men who weeks earlier spoke of the Zero with fear now discuss it with professional respect tempered by understanding. They know what to do when a Zero appears. They have specific maneuvers, tested and proven, that allow them to escape or counterattack. The psychological balance begins shifting, not yet in America's favor, but no longer hopelessly tilted towards Japan. But the Akutan Zero's greatest contribution extends beyond tactical doctrine. The intelligence arrives at a crucial moment in the development of what will become the most successful carrier fighter of the Pacific War, the Grumman F6F Hellcat. The connection between the captured Zero and the Hellcat has generated historical debate. Some historians claim the Hellcat was designed based on the Akutan Zero. Others note the timeline makes direct design influence impossible. The truth lies between these extremes, a story more complex and interesting than simple cause and effect. The Hellcat program begins in mid-1941, nearly a year before Koga crashes in the Aleutians. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation receives Navy requirements for a fighter to replace the F4F Wildcat, requirements driven by pre-war assessments of likely threats. The initial design, designated XF6F1, centers on the Wright 2600 Cyclone engine, producing 1,700 horsepower. This represents more power than the Wildcat's 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1830-8, but company founder Leroy Grumman questions whether it's enough. Early 1942 brings increasingly alarming reports from the Pacific. American pilots are being systematically outfought. The F4F Wildcat proves inadequate despite being fundamentally sound. Combat reports indicate the Zero possesses performance that American intelligence underestimated. Something dramatically better is needed.
On April 22, 1942, 6 weeks before Midway and 7 weeks before Koga's crash, Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare visits Grumman's Bethpage facility. O'Hare has just earned the Medal of Honor for single-handedly defending the carrier Lexington against Japanese bombers, shooting down 5 enemy aircraft in minutes. His combat experience against Zeros is recent, vivid, and sobering. O'Hare meets with Grumman engineers and delivers blunt assessments. The Zero is faster than intelligence estimated, climbs better than seems physically possible, and turns inside the Wildcat with ease. American fighters need more power, better climb rate, and improved visibility. When asked what the Navy needs most, O'Hare's response is memorable: a plane that will go upstairs faster. 5 days later, still before Koga's crash, the Bureau of Aeronautics makes a critical decision. Based on combat reports and O'Hare's recommendations, BUAir directs Grumman to abandon the Wright R2600 engine in favor of the more powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower. This represents a 50% increase in power over the original design and requires significant airframe modifications to handle the additional weight and power. The first XF6F1 prototype, still fitted with the Wright R2600 Cyclone, flies on June 26, 1942, 8 days before Koga crashes and 6 weeks before the Zero is discovered. The prototype performs well, but confirms that more power is needed. The second prototype, designated XF6F3 and fitted with the 2,000 horsepower R2800 Double Wasp, first flies on July 30, 1942. This is 20 days after the Akutan Zero's discovery, but 2 months before it will be restored to flying condition and tested. So the Hellcat was not designed based on the Akutan Zero. The timeline makes that impossible. The basic design, the engine choice, even the first prototype flights all predate any intelligence from the captured aircraft. But here's where the story becomes interesting. When the Akutan Zero arrives in San Diego in mid-August, detailed technical data begins flowing to the Bureau of Aeronautics and Grumman within days. The aircraft hasn't flown yet, but physical examination reveals crucial information about construction, weight, armament, and design philosophy. This intelligence arrives at a critical moment. The basic Hellcat design is set, the engine selected, prototypes flying, but production hasn't begun. Changes can still be incorporated relatively easily. Grumman engineers study the Zero data with intense interest, looking for ways to ensure their fighter can not just match but exceed the Japanese aircraft's capabilities. The Zero weighs between 5,300 and 6,165 pounds fully loaded. The Hellcat will weigh over 12,000 pounds, more than double the Zero's weight. This enormous weight penalty must be compensated by additional power and intelligent design. But Grumman's philosophy differs fundamentally from the Japanese approach. Where the Zero sacrifices protection for performance, the Hellcat will provide both. Roy Grumman makes a crucial decision after studying the Zero data. Grumman will match or surpass the Zero in most performance categories without sacrificing pilot armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and robust fuselage structure. The F6F will compensate for extra weight with raw power from the R2800 engine. This shapes everything that follows. The Hellcat will be built tough, capable of absorbing battle damage that would destroy a Zero. When Sanders begins his test flights in September and October, additional intelligence flows from every flight. The high-speed aileron problems, the engine cutout under -G, the fragile construction, the turning capabilities, all this data gets incorporated into final Hellcat refinements before production ramps up. The F6F's wings are designed for high-speed performance using a different airfoil and control surface design than the Wildcat. The ailerons are hydraulically boosted and metal-covered, ensuring full control authority at all speeds. This directly addresses the high-speed aileron problem Sanders discovered. The F6F will roll effectively at speeds where the Zero's controls lock up. The F6F's fuel system uses a pressure carburetor rather than the float type used in the Zero. This ensures the engine continues running under negative acceleration, eliminating the weakness Sanders exploited. An F6F pilot can dive away from a pursuing Zero without his engine quitting. The F6F structure is designed to handle 9G positive and 6G negative acceleration, far exceeding Zero structural limits. F6F pilots can use aggressive maneuvers without fear of structural failure, while Zeros attempting to follow risk breaking apart. The armament increases to 6.5 caliber machine guns compared to the Wildcat's 4. Later versions offer the option of two 20mm cannons and 4.5 caliber guns. The concentrated firepower can destroy the lightly built Zero with short bursts, while the F6F's armored structure can absorb return fire. Visibility from the cockpit is exceptional, with the raised pilot position providing clear views in all directions. This addresses the emphasis that pilots cannot shoot what they cannot see. The design recognizes that visibility is crucial for mutual support between wingmen.
On October 3, 1942, just 2 weeks after Sanders completed his initial test flights, the first production F6F-3 makes its maiden flight. The timing is deliberate. Production was delayed until engineers could incorporate the latest intelligence from the captured Zero. The Hellcat wasn't designed based on the Akutan Zero, that's demonstrably false, but the timing allowed Grumman to refine the F6F's final configuration based on knowledge gained from the captured aircraft, incorporating tactical lessons before production ramped up. The first production F6F-3s begin reaching fleet squadrons in early 1943. Fighting Squadron 9 receives the first operational Hellcats in February, embarking on the carrier Essex for training and workup. Pilot reaction is enthusiastic beyond expectation. After months fighting in F4F Wildcats, struggling against superior Japanese aircraft, the F6F feels like a revelation. It's faster, it climbs better, it has more firepower, visibility is exceptional, and it feels solid in a way the Wildcat never did. Not just strong, but confidence-inspiring. Pilots quickly discover the F6F is remarkably easy to fly, designed specifically to be operated by relatively inexperienced pilots fresh from training. Grumman recognized that wartime expansion would flood the fleet with newly minted aviators who needed an aircraft that wouldn't kill them during training. The F6F has no bad habits, no tricky characteristics that can kill an unwary pilot. It's stable, predictable, forgiving of mistakes. Carrier landings, the most challenging aspect of naval aviation, are straightforward in the Hellcat. The robust landing gear absorbs hard impacts that would collapse lesser aircraft. Visibility allows pilots to precisely judge their approach. Controls remain responsive at low speeds required for carrier approaches. Production ramps up with astonishing speed. Grumman builds a new factory at Bethpage specifically for F6F production. At peak production in 1944, Grumman produces 644 aircraft in a single month, one Hellcat per hour, an aircraft production record never equaled. The scale staggers comprehension. Each F6F requires approximately 20,000 individual parts sourced from hundreds of subcontractors. Pratt & Whitney engines are built in 3 separate factories and shipped to Bethpage for installation. Between October 1942 and war's end in November 1945, a span of approximately 37 months, Grumman produces 12,275 F6F Hellcats from a single factory complex. This industrial achievement rivals any of the war, more remarkable because it's not just quantity but quality. Each Hellcat is a complex, high-performance aircraft built to exacting standards. The production line runs with Swiss watch precision, coordinated by production genius Jake Swerble. Many Grumman workers have never built aircraft before, yet they produce the most successful carrier fighter of the war. Women comprise significant portions of the workforce. Rosie the Riveter is not merely propaganda, but reality at Bethpage. The factory operates around the clock, 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Aircraft roll off the assembly line in a steady stream, immediately transported to naval air stations for delivery to operational squadrons. The F6F makes its combat debut on August 31, 1943, 15 months after the Akutan Zero's discovery. Aircraft from Fighting Squadrons 5 and 9 operating from carriers Yorktown and Independence attack Marcus Island as part of a carrier raid. The mission succeeds overwhelmingly. No Japanese fighters manage to get airborne. Several are destroyed on the ground.
2 Hellcats are lost to anti-aircraft fire, but in air-to-air combat, the F6F demonstrates immediate superiority. Over following months, the Hellcat becomes standard equipment on American fleet carriers, gradually replacing the Wildcat on large carriers. By early 1944, 15 carrier fighter squadrons fly Hellcats. The aircraft is rapidly becoming the dominant American naval fighter in the Pacific, the weapon that will break Japanese aerial resistance. Tactical lessons from the Akutan Zero are woven into every aspect of F6F operations. Pilots are trained to avoid slow-speed turning fights unless they possess significant altitude or numerical advantage. Instead, F6F doctrine emphasizes high-speed slashing attacks, diving from altitude to build speed, making a single firing pass, then zooming back to altitude before more maneuverable Zeros can respond. The thatch weave becomes standard defensive doctrine. When jumped by Zeros, F6F pilots fly in mutually supporting pairs, weaving back and forth so that any Zero pursuing one F6F immediately faces head-on fire from his wingman. The tactic neutralizes the Zero's turning advantage by forcing the Japanese pilot into defensive maneuvering where his advantage evaporates. Pilots use speed and power to dictate engagement terms. If the tactical situation favors the F6F, engage aggressively. If not, use superior speed to disengage, reposition, and attack from advantage. The F6F's climb rate allows it to regain altitude quickly after diving attacks. Its speed allows escape from unfavorable situations. Its endurance allows it to patrol longer and chase fleeing enemies farther than Zeros can follow. November 23, 1943, Gilbert Islands. F6F Hellcats from carrier Essex engage Japanese Zero fighters over Tarawa in what becomes the first major test of the new fighter against Japan's best. 30 Zeros rise to intercept the American strike. The ensuing dogfight rages across the skies over invasion beaches. When the smoke clears, American pilots claim 30 Japanese fighters destroyed for the loss of a single F6F. The Battle of Tarawa demonstrates everything the F6F was designed to accomplish. American pilots, many relatively inexperienced, have met veteran Japanese aviators flying Zeros and crushed them utterly. The combination of superior aircraft performance, sound tactics based on knowledge of the Zero's weaknesses, and intensive training has created an unbeatable formula. The battle's outcome sends shockwaves through both American and Japanese commands. For Americans, it validates the F6F's design and tactical doctrines developed from studying the Akutan Zero. For Japanese, it reveals that American aircraft have caught up to and surpassed the Zero's capabilities. The age of Japanese aerial superiority is ending.
June 19, 1944, Philippine Sea, west of the Mariana Islands. F6F Hellcats from 15 American aircraft carriers prepare to face the largest Japanese carrier aviation force assembled since Midway. The Japanese have 9 carriers and send wave after wave of aircraft to destroy the American invasion fleet attacking Saipan. What follows becomes known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the most one-sided aerial battle in naval history. The first Japanese strike, 69 aircraft, loses 42 planes before reaching the American fleet. The remaining 27 that penetrate accomplish nothing while facing a storm of anti-aircraft fire and swarming F6Fs. The second wave, 107 Japanese aircraft, loses 97 before they can attack. Japanese carrier aviation is being systematically destroyed. Throughout the day, Japanese carriers launch 370 aircraft in multiple strikes. Only 130 return. F6F Hellcats, flying combat air patrol over the fleet and hunting Japanese strike groups, shoot down the vast majority. American losses total 23 to 30 aircraft, many pilots rescued from the ocean. The strategic impact proves catastrophic for Japan. The carrier air groups painstakingly rebuilt after Midway losses are annihilated. Experienced pilots who trained the current generation are dead. Aircraft hoarded for the decisive battle are gone. Japanese naval aviation will never recover from this single day's losses.
The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrates the F6F at peak effectiveness. Exceptional endurance allows continuous combat air patrols over the fleet. Climb rate ensures F6Fs intercept incoming strikes at optimal altitude. Speed allows pursuit of fleeing Japanese aircraft. Firepower and protection mean that in any head-to-head engagement, the F6F holds overwhelming advantage. Most importantly, the F6F's easy handling means even relatively inexperienced American pilots can operate effectively in combat. By mid-1944, the United States produces pilots far faster than Japan. The F6F allows these new aviators to be thrown into combat with confidence they can survive and succeed. Japanese pilots, by contrast, receive increasingly abbreviated training as fuel shortages and instructor losses mount. By late 1944, Japanese pilots enter combat with perhaps one-third the flight hours American pilots receive. The experience differential, combined with the F6F's technical superiority, creates a death spiral for Japanese aviation. Every engagement costs Japan irreplaceable pilots, while American losses are quickly replaced by training pipelines producing thousands of new aviators annually. By war's end, F6F Hellcats compile statistics that remain unmatched by any American fighter. The aircraft is credited with destroying 5,163 enemy aircraft in Pacific air-to-air combat by United States Navy and Marine Corps pilots. An additional 60 aircraft fall to Hellcats in other theaters. When including British Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm victories, the total reaches 5,223 enemy aircraft destroyed. Only 270 F6Fs are lost in air-to-air combat. The overall kill-to-loss ratio stands at 19-1. Against Japanese Zeros specifically, the ratio is 13-1. These numbers reflect combined impact of superior aircraft performance, sound tactical doctrine derived from studying the Akutan Zero, and increasingly skilled American pilots facing declining Japanese opposition. The Hellcat's combat record is so dominant that late-war Japanese pilots develop what American intelligence calls zero fatigue, recognition that engaging F6Fs is likely fatal. Japanese pilots increasingly avoid combat when possible, diving away or fleeing into clouds rather than fighting. This psychological dominance proves as important as technical superiority, allowing American carrier groups to operate with near impunity. The contrast with early war combat is absolute. In 1942, American pilots fled from Zeros whenever possible. By 1945, Japanese pilots flee from F6Fs. The transformation is complete, total, and irreversible. The Akutan Zero is destroyed in February 1945, ironically in a training accident rather than combat. While taxiing for takeoff at Naval Air Station North Island, a SB-2C Helldiver dive bomber loses control and crashes into the parked Zero. The Helldiver's propeller slices the Japanese fighter into pieces. The physical aircraft is gone, but its legacy lives on. Tadayoshi Koga's body, initially buried on Akutan Island, is exhumed by American Graves Registration Service teams in 1947 and reburied on Adak Island. In 1953, the Adak Cemetery is excavated, and 236 bodies, likely including Koga's remains, are returned to Japan for burial. The young pilot who died at age 19 becomes an unwitting contributor to Japan's defeat, his perfectly preserved aircraft revealing secrets that doom thousands of his countrymen. Japanese historian and Air Self-Defense Force Lieutenant General Masatake Okumiya, who flew as a staff officer in most major Pacific carrier battles, states that the acquisition of the Akutan Zero was no less serious than the Japanese defeat at Midway. The Zero's secrets being revealed to American engineers and test pilots represents a catastrophic intelligence failure whose consequences ripple throughout the remaining war years. Fighter ace William Leonard calls the captured Zero a treasure that unlocked so many secrets at a time when the need was so great. Marine ace Kenneth Walsh credits intelligence from Koga Zero with saving his life several times, tactical knowledge allowing him to survive early encounters that might otherwise have been fatal. The transformation of American naval aviation from defensive inferiority in early 1942 to overwhelming dominance by mid-1944 happens through convergence of industrial capacity, engineering excellence, skilled pilots, and intelligence. The Akutan Zero reveals that the seemingly invincible Japanese fighter has exploitable weaknesses. The F6F Hellcat is designed and employed to exploit those weaknesses ruthlessly. When American pilots take F6F Hellcats into combat, they carry not just superior technology, but superior knowledge. They know the Zero's weaknesses because Eddie Sanders discovered them. They know how to exploit those weaknesses because tactical doctrine has been rewritten based on Sanders' test flights. They know they can win because the mystique of Japanese invincibility has been shattered by hard data from a captured aircraft. The 19-to-1 kill ratio represents the inevitable result, a testament to what can be achieved when chance provides opportunity and skill transforms that opportunity into overwhelming advantage.
8 decades have passed since Tadayoshi Koga's final flight carved its arc through Aleutian fog. The aircraft he flew has long since vanished, reduced to scrap metal by an accidental collision on a San Diego runway. The secrets it revealed have been declassified, analyzed, taught in military academies worldwide. Yet the story refuses to fade into historical footnote. It endures because it illuminates a fundamental truth about modern warfare that remains as relevant today as it was in 1942. Victory doesn't always belong to the side with the sharpest sword. Sometimes it belongs to the side that understands why the sword is sharp and where it's brittle. The Akutan Zero and the F6F Hellcat represent more than aircraft specifications and combat statistics. They embody the eternal struggle between technological excellence and strategic adaptation, between individual brilliance and systematic superiority, between the mystique of invincibility and the cold reality of exploitable weakness. Japan built a magnificent fighter optimized for a specific type of warfare, flown by supremely trained pilots who could leverage its advantages while avoiding its vulnerabilities. America built an industrial system capable of producing good enough fighters in overwhelming numbers, flown by adequately trained pilots who knew exactly how to force combat into regimes where good enough became decisively superior. The 19-to-1 kill ratio tells only part of the story. The complete narrative lies in the journey, from Pearl Harbor's shock and humiliation, through desperate months when American pilots fled from Zeros, to final dominance so absolute that Japanese pilots developed psychological aversion to combat. That transformation didn't happen through a single technological breakthrough or tactical innovation. It happened through the convergence of industrial capacity, engineering pragmatism, tactical intelligence, and the willingness to learn from enemy hardware. Tadayoshi Koga died believing he served his emperor with honor. His wingmen chose compassion over orders, mercy over doctrine. American salvage crews endured weeks of brutal labor in one of Earth's most hostile environments to recover a prize whose value they could only guess. Eddie Sanders risked his life to fly an enemy aircraft whose characteristics he could only estimate from second-hand combat reports. Grumman engineers refined their fighter based on intelligence that arrived at precisely the right moment. Thousands of American pilots learned tactics derived from one man's test flight in a captured aircraft. None of them could have predicted how these separate actions would converge into victory. That's the nature of war. Individual decisions made in isolation under pressure sometimes align to create outcomes far exceeding their individual significance.
The ghost fighter from the Aleutian Mist taught America how to win the Pacific Air War, not through its destruction, but through its revelation, not through what it destroyed in American hands, but through what it revealed about Japanese engineering philosophy, tactical doctrine, and strategic vulnerability. The lessons extracted from that single aircraft, tested for mere months, destroyed accidentally, preserved now only in museum fragments and archived reports, helped forge the weapon that would break Japanese aerial resistance and establish American air superiority for the remainder of the war. This is the enduring lesson. In modern warfare, knowledge is as lethal as firepower. Understanding your enemy's weaknesses can be more valuable than building weapons to match their strengths. Intelligence properly exploited can multiply force more effectively than raw numbers. And sometimes, just sometimes, the greatest strategic victory comes not from destroying what your enemy has built, but from understanding it so completely that you can render it obsolete. The Hellcat didn't defeat the Zero through superior technology alone. It defeated the Zero through superior understanding, translated into tactical doctrine and engineering refinements that exploited every weakness Eddie Sanders discovered in that Aleutian ghost. When those two aircraft met in Pacific skies, the outcome was never truly in doubt, not because American pilots were braver or more skilled, but because they understood their enemy in ways their enemy never understood them. That understanding began in an Aleutian bog, with a young pilot's fatal error and his wingmen's merciful choice. It ended with Japan's aerial defeat, 5,000 aircraft destroyed, aerial supremacy lost forever, and a war decided partly by intelligence extracted from a single captured fighter that chance delivered into American hands at precisely the moment when it could reshape the course of history. 8 decades later, the lesson endures. The sword that cuts deepest isn't always the sharpest blade. Sometimes it's the one wielded by the warrior who knows exactly where his enemy's armor is weakest and strikes there with absolute precision.